to hear this news at this time of someone that felt so alive in the moment. How are you processing this information right now?
Well, you're listening to all the things that people are saying, and first of all, it's unthinkable. Someone who hasn't even entered the prime of life yet, that we followed. We followed his entire, not just his career, but his life, starting in high school. So by the time Kobe Bryant was 17 years old, most of us knew who he was. By the time he was 20, we all knew who he was. And then we followed everything that happened with him on and off the field of play for more than half his life. And so it's unthinkable. We hear the news in the various ways we're consuming it. And just last night, I think he was tweeting about LeBron James moving up a notch on the all-time scoring list, and there he was. A few weeks before the end of Kobe's playing career, we sat down for what was going to be, one of the final interviews of his playing career, and we did that in Denver. And we talked about storytelling and how much he loved the stories. And they weren't just of sports, they were of, all kinds of stuff. And I think some of us who got to know him a little bit away from the court found it fascinating that he was this into something else, this, obsessed with it, committed to it. We can see what sort of things he was involved in his post-playing career. You think of all that yet to come, now not to come. And it's the kind of thing that I don't know. I don't know that I'm sure I'll be part of, our continuing coverage of this tragedy. And part of it is I just want to turn away from it. It's just not something that I don't think many of us can sort of process the way we want to. It just takes you far afield into places that you start thinking about games, series, and this is larger than anything that has to do with basketball in his career. And it's just something that we're going to have to take a while to process and comprehend.
Hey, Michael, from this perspective, all the greats somehow, anecdotally, physically, mentally, they change the game, the way it is played, the way it is perceived. How do you think Kobe changed basketball?
Well, I think it happened in concert. We can go far back when there were 6 and 8 teams in the NBA, and you can look at what Russell did or what Wilt did and how the game reacted to those guys. And even moving forward with Magic and Michael and Larry, and you come into the next wave, that first generation of guys who played, of course, a bridge generation, if you will, with Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe being the headliners of that. And you mentioned Paul Pierce, and Paul was part of that, obviously, with the Celtics, with the irresistible rivalry between the two pillars of life in the NBA. And, they perhaps did it as an ensemble, and Kobe was the brightest star in that galaxy. Shaq may have been more dominant in a basketball conversation way, but Kobe was the brightest star in that galaxy of the next players after Michael Jordan in his retirement and beyond, until his last game. I remember having to make a choice between covering what would be a historic game for the Golden State Warriors at home at the end of that season, and they were going for their 73rd win, or going to Southern California to watch Kobe Bryant's final game, because there would be no playoffs for the Lakers. And I chose the former. I chose to watch Golden State because I knew that was going to be historic. We didn't know that coming from Kobe, who had been coming back from all sorts of injuries, and they weren't in the playoffs, and they weren't the Lakers or the Kobe Bryant that we had come to know for, the better part of 2 decades. And then those of us who went to Golden State that night, who went to Oakland and Oracle, sat transfixed after that game was over, a rather routine, non-headlining game, and watched as Kobe, turned in one of the all-time performances. And it's just, his career had that level of showmanship. His life had that. He's just this stunningly handsome, beautiful family. He was in all kinds of headlines. Some he didn't want to be in throughout his career and life. But these last years, he seemed to be recently just incredibly, not just happy, but productive. If you can see the amount of work that he was involved in, the amount of content that he produced or was helping produce. And so you think of all of it. I can't really separate it at this point. And even though we will be asked to do that repeatedly over the next days and coming weeks.
Mike, the time that you spent with Kobe Bryant, oftentimes people would say he was a complicated individual. He could be very charming, but he could be very standoffish as well. How would you describe Kobe, the person, not the athlete, not the competitor, not one of the all-time greats, but just Kobe Bryant, the man, the person on a social level?
Well, Michael, I never saw the standoffish part. I didn't see it, and that maybe that's because of what I did. Writing a column for the Washington Post when I got to know him, and then working for the network for the balance of his career. I didn't see that part. I saw the person, and obviously after games, you after performances, and there's a reason they're called performances, and he understood that. I mean, he understood that his life had to be given to that. That you just didn't. You might want to be off stage, but you really weren't. And so I didn't really see that. I know people talk about it, but a very bright, very curious guy. I'll tell you this, and Michael, I don't know if you were there, but one night late in that run where Kobe's at the end of his career, and there were people coming in from all over the world to talk to him. And, I had asked Kobe years in advance, like, how many languages would you speak publicly? What are you going to speak publicly? He said, no, I'm doing English and Italian publicly, and that's it. Well, the crazy thing was later that night, there were some journalists there, and there was no translator. And they were attempting to interview Kobe in Spanish. And he looked around, and he didn't see anybody who could translate for him. And he just starts answering and doing the conversation in Spanish. And I just remember looking at him, and he rolled his eyes as if to say, no, I'm not really that good at this. And, of course, he was great at it.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.